Morning rested over the small farmhouse like a folded prayer. Pots cooled on the stove, a kettle hummed in low breaths, and the window received the first thin ribbon of light. His mother moved with the quiet knowledge of someone who had learned to live between need and gratitude. The boy sat at the table, small feet not yet finding the floor, palms open to the wood as if listening to the grain. A sparrow startled at the sill, and in that tremor the air itself seemed to pause, as though another room, an older room, had opened inside the kitchen. He lifted his eyes. They were clear in a way that was not only childhood. They were clear like water that remembers the mountain. Without hurry, without effort, he said the sentence that split the ordinary from the holy. I walked with Enoch before he was taken. The kettle clicked. The clock continued its honest labor. But the room had changed temperature, like a church when someone enters to weep. His mother turned, no storm on her face, no scolding in her hands, only that sacred confusion that visits the faithful when the veil thins. The boy kept looking past her shoulder, past the pantry door, past the calendar pinned by a magnet, toward a place no one else could see, and yet everyone somehow felt. Outside, the wind bent the wheat in a long exhale. Inside, the scent of bread moved through the quiet like a small procession. He spoke again, softer, as if answering a companion just beyond the doorway. His steps didn't shake the dust. The ground was glad. Who had taught him that name? Who had given him that cadence? The hush of someone describing a friend, not a legend? The mother's fingers trembled on the cup. The father, from the hallway, slowed his breathing to hear better as a fisherman leans forward when the line grows tense. The boy's face shone with that clean attention children give to butterflies, stars, and truths too big for shelves. He tilted his head, listening with his whole small body. The light along the window frame widened. In it, motes turned like tiny psalms. He reached one hand into that brightness, the way one reaches for a hand already extended. He smiled, the boy whispered. He said the earth remembers every faithful step. Oh, what would you have felt if you had been there, letting the steam from the tea warm your face while a child opened a door that wasn't on any wall? Would you have believed, or would some shy fear have nudged you to laugh and change the subject? Have you ever sensed a presence so gentle that it made you ache, because gentleness reveals how rough our days have become? And if you were the one standing in that threshold, hearing a name from the first pages of the world echo through a 6-year-old's mouth, would your heart not rise like a bird suddenly freed? Would you reach out to steady yourself on the table or on a prayer you haven't prayed in years? He lowered his hand. The moment did not end. It only went quiet, like a lake when the oar stops. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere, an old promise remembered itself. In the kitchen, the boy looked at them with the simple peace of someone who has walked where time cannot go. Stay. Sometimes the mystery speaks louder than reason. The boy's world was a quiet one. A small farmhouse at the edge of the valley, where the soil still carried the shape of ancient prayers. His father rose before dawn, hands rough with work, whispering short psalms as he tightened his boots. His mother sang while washing clothes in the basin, her voice soft as worn linen. Faith was not a doctrine in that home. It was a habit, stitched into everything. The bread dough, the morning air, the way they said grace even when there wasn't much to bless. The child, named Samuel, carried silence like other children carried toys. He was not slow nor strange, only listening all the time. His eyes searched corners that others forgot to notice, the shimmer between raindrops, the echo of church bells miles away, the stillness that follows when someone finishes praying. At 6 years old, he could already sense when a storm was about to change direction or when someone nearby carried sorrow. He would look up, as if hearing a note the wind itself didn't understand. He loved to sit under the fig tree behind the house. From there, he watched the fields stretch toward the horizon, that invisible line where the sky seemed to breathe on the earth. Sometimes he whispered to it, and his mother, hearing from the kitchen, thought he was just playing. But there was a weight in his small words, as though he was remembering rather than imagining. He used to walk this way, he once said. He liked when the birds followed him. The parents smiled at his fancies, calling them sweet dreams. Yet the boy's tone was too steady, too real. He didn't speak of heroes from cartoons or knights from stories. He spoke of light, of steps, of laughter that didn't echo because the air itself had no distance. And when they asked, "Who are you talking about?" his answer was always the same: the man who walked until God wanted him closer. Days passed with that strange peace, a house built of prayer and wonder. The neighbors saw nothing unusual, except perhaps the boy's calm eyes that made adults feel both comforted and uneasy. He was kind, always sharing, always thanking. But sometimes, at dusk, he would stand still, looking toward the hill as if waiting for someone who never used the road. There were moments when the family felt it, that brief vibration in the air like a breath behind the curtain of the world. The dog would lift its head. The clock would tick slower. The boy's lips would part slightly, but no sound came out. And afterward, he would return to his toys as if the veil had closed again. You've seen children before, restless, bright, loud. But have you ever seen one who didn't need to speak to change the atmosphere of a room? A child whose silence felt like the pause between two verses of scripture? You might not call it holiness, perhaps only strangeness. Yet something in your chest would tighten, as if memory itself was trying to surface. His father sometimes woke in the night and found Samuel sitting by the window, watching the stars. "What do you see, son?" he would ask, half smiling, half afraid. The boy would answer, "I'm looking for the path." "What path?" "The one that leaves no footprints." The man would laugh softly, pat the boy's head, and return to bed, pretending not to notice the trembling in his own hands, because part of him, deep down, remembered a verse about Enoch, the one who walked with God and was no more. And something inside whispered, what if the same wind that took him once has passed through this house again? Even the mother began to pray differently. Her words grew slower, more careful, as if she feared they might wake something ancient. When she kissed her son goodnight, she sometimes paused a second longer, not because of worry, but because she felt something radiant near him, like the edge of a dawn she couldn't yet see. In that home, faith became both comfort and question. The boy didn't preach, didn't ask, he only was. His presence made the world feel fragile and eternal at once. You've met children before, but if you had stepped into that farmhouse, felt the weightless hush that followed him wherever he walked, would you have called it innocence? Or would you have known it for what it truly was? The early echo of the divine? The first time Samuel spoke of it again, it was raining. The soft kind of rain that doesn't chase people indoors, only teaches them to listen. He was drawing circles in the fogged window, his mother kneading dough behind him, when he said in that same quiet voice, "It wasn't dark that day. The sky was open, but it wasn't sun. It was light without a place to come from." His mother stopped her hands in the flour. "What day, Samuel?" He turned to her, smiling faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't belong to stories but to remembrance. The day he came for him. She felt her chest tighten, though she didn't yet understand why. "Who, my love?" "The man," Samuel said simply. "The one who walked until he was not." The air shifted again, just as it had weeks ago. Not colder, not warmer, but thinner. The space between heartbeat and silence stretched, and the mother, afraid to break whatever hovered there, whispered, "You mean Enoch?" The boy nodded. He wasn't afraid. The air lifted him and everything was quiet. Even the birds stopped to watch. He returned to the window, tracing the drops as though they were roads. His mother didn't move. She knew the story of Enoch, every believer did, but hearing it from a 6-year-old who spoke like a witness turned the story into a wound that pulsed with both beauty and fear. Later that night, the father came home, tired, mud on his boots and doubt in his eyes. When his wife repeated what their son had said, he only sighed. "He listens to your readings, that's all. He's got imagination." But she shook her head. "No, he says it like a memory, not a dream." The father brushed it away, yet when he peeked into Samuel's room, the boy was awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "You should sleep, son," he whispered. "I can't," Samuel replied. "When I close my eyes, I see his face. It's not like the pictures. It's full of joy and something else." "What do you mean?" The boy's voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to echo from far beyond the room. He looked like someone who had just finished a long journey and found the way home. The father's throat tightened. For a moment he felt as if the walls had stepped back to make space for something unseen. He wanted to ask more, but the boy was already drifting into sleep, the faintest smile on his lips. Days went by, and Samuel began to speak more often in half-phrases that made no sense to adults, but carried the cadence of ancient songs. He said, "The wind remembers the faithful." He told me the stars still hum the names of the just. He said the ground is softer where prayers have walked. His mother wrote some of them down, afraid they would vanish like mist if she didn't. At church, when the pastor read from Genesis, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Samuel's eyes filled with tears so sudden and so clean that even the pastor faltered. After the service, a few people whispered that the boy was sensitive, gifted perhaps. But one old woman in the back pew murmured, "No, that child remembers something." And maybe she was right, because at home during the evenings, Samuel began to hum low melodies no one had taught him, slow, reverent tunes that made even the dog lie down quietly. And when asked where he learned them, he said, "He sang them when we walked. He said they keep the world awake." If your child said that, would you believe? Would your heart lean toward faith or flee toward reason? Would you hush them? Or would you listen, trembling, afraid of what believing might cost? There was a night when the rain came harder, and the parents woke to find Samuel standing barefoot at the door, staring into the storm. Lightning flared, yet he did not blink. "He's near," he whispered, "but not for me this time." His father pulled him inside, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. The boy smiled up, water dripping from his hair. "It doesn't hurt to be taken," he said. "It's only love too heavy for the earth to hold." The father couldn't sleep after that. He sat by the window until dawn, the image of his son's small face lit by stormlight replaying like a prayer he didn't understand. If you were there, hearing those words under the roar of rain, what would stir in you? Fear, awe, or the long-forgotten certainty that heaven sometimes whispers through the smallest voices? The seasons turned softly around the farmhouse, as if the earth itself feared to disturb the quiet life growing there. Samuel had grown taller, but the same unearthly calm followed him like a shadow of light. He laughed at simple things, the hum of bees, the ripple of a brook. Yet sometimes that laughter would stop suddenly, as though he had heard a name carried on the wind. His parents learned to live between wonder and unease. The mother prayed more, whispering old psalms into her apron as she cooked. The father spoke less, his silence a shell against something he could not reason with. Their home, once filled with the ordinary rhythm of chores and songs, had taken on a strange reverence. Every sound seemed to arrive from farther away, as if time itself had stepped back to listen. Samuel's drawings changed too. He no longer filled pages with trees and animals, but with winding paths of light. One afternoon, his mother asked, "What is that, sweetheart?" He answered with simple certainty, "The place where footsteps end." That night, she found him outside again, sitting beneath the fig tree, eyes lifted toward a sky that glowed pale with starlight. "I remember the air," he murmured. It had weight, but not heaviness. It was full of voices, but they were all one voice. She crouched beside him. "You keep saying remember. What do you remember, Samuel?" He turned, his face solemn. "Before I came here, I walked there, with him." The words fell into her heart like stones into deep water. No sound, only the long rippling afterward. The next morning, she told the pastor, he came to visit, a calm man with silver hair and eyes that carried both kindness and disbelief. He sat with Samuel, asking gentle questions. "You said you walked with someone. Who was he?" Samuel looked at him steadily. "The one who was taken." The pastor's voice softened. "Do you mean Enoch?" The boy nodded. "He said walking with God doesn't mean leaving the world. It means the world leaves you." The pastor froze, unsure whether to correct or to pray. Word began to spread quietly through the village that the Miller boys saw things, said things. Some came out of curiosity, some out of fear. A few brought food, pretending kindness while seeking a story to tell. Yet when they entered the house, they spoke in whispers, as though stepping into a sanctuary. There was something in the air, a tenderness that made even unbelievers hesitate before speaking too loud. One evening, the father found Samuel sitting by the hearth, staring into the flames. "What do you see there?" he asked, trying to sound playful. "The same light," the boy said. "It hides in everything that burns." The man swallowed. "Does it ever frighten you?" Samuel looked up, puzzled. "Why would love frighten me?" His father had no answer. Nights grew longer. The moon seemed brighter over the valley. Sometimes Samuel would rise suddenly from bed, saying he had heard footsteps outside. The parents would rush to the window, but there was only mist, trembling in the moonlight. "He's practicing," Samuel once said. "He walks near so I don't forget the sound." The mother wept softly that night, not from fear, but from an ache she could not name. "You've known silence. But have you ever known a silence that feels alive? A pause so full that your heart beats louder just to prove you still belong to the world?" That was the silence that grew in their home. Even their prayers began to change shape. No longer requests, they became echoes, as if heaven was closer than breath. One dawn, the father woke to the smell of dew and heard Samuel humming again. But this time, the song had words. Step by step until the shadows end. Step by step until light remembers. When asked where he learned it, he said simply, "He taught me before the last hill." And so the mystery grew, not in visions or miracles, but in the ordinary tenderness of a child who remembered what most of the world forgot, that walking with God is not about distance, but presence. If such a child lived under your roof, one whose words opened windows to another realm, would you dare to believe? Or would you close those windows out of love, afraid that what shines too bright might take him away? How many times does the divine walk quietly among us, unseen, because we mistake wonder for imagination? And when we finally notice, are we ready to follow? The pastor returned a few days later. He had tried to pray the unease away, but Samuel's words had followed him like the scent of rain before a storm. His congregation spoke of the boy with the hush reserved for miracles or for madness. Yet something in the pastor's heart told him this was not madness. It was something older, something gentler, that asked only to be listened to. When he arrived, Samuel was in the yard, stacking stones in a neat circle. "What are you building?" the pastor asked. Samuel smiled without looking up. "A memory." The man knelt beside him. Whose memory? The earth's, said the boy, his hands dusty. It remembers where faith stood. The pastor's throat tightened. You speak like someone who's lived many lives, Samuel. The boy looked at him, calm and certain. No, just one that hasn't forgotten. They sat together in silence. Wind moved through the wheat like 1,000 whispered amens. The pastor watched, trying to measure the boy's stillness. It was not the stillness of thought. It was presence, vast and simple, like a candle that doesn't know it gives light. Inside the house, the mother watched through the window, her apron still damp from washing. She prayed under her breath, not for her son to change, but for herself to bear what he carried. When the pastor finally spoke, it was not with authority, but humility. Samuel, do you know why people are afraid of what you say? The boy considered. Because they've forgotten what walking feels like. They pray for wings, but God gave us feet. The pastor closed his eyes. It was not the words that struck him, but the peace behind them. A peace he had chased for years through sermons and study, now revealed in a child's sentence. Later he sat with the parents in the small kitchen. He isn't delusional, he said softly, and he isn't pretending. I think he remembers something holy. The father stared at the table. If it's holy, why does it scare me? The pastor sighed. Because holiness always asks us to loosen our grip on what we think we understand. Outside, Samuel continued stacking stones, humming that same ancient tune. The pastor stepped out once more and asked, Samuel, does he still walk with you? The boy shook his head. Not like before. He walks ahead now. I only see where the grass bends. The wind answered with a low murmur through the trees. That night, the pastor dreamed of Enoch, not as a distant figure, but as light clothed in breath reaching out a hand. When he woke, tears were already on his face. He returned to the farmhouse before dawn, needing to see the boy again. He found Samuel by the fence, gazing east as the first light broke the horizon. What are you looking for? The pastor asked. The place where words end, the boy said. The pastor swallowed. And what happens there? Samuel smiled faintly. Silence speaks. For a long time, the man could not move. Every verse he had ever learned, every sermon he had preached, seemed to bow before that single answer. He placed a trembling hand on the boy's shoulder. Samuel, if people ask about you, what should I tell them? Tell them he still walks, the boy replied. Just slower now so hearts can catch up. The pastor nodded, his own heart breaking open, not with sorrow, but with awe. You, yes, you, reading this, if you stood there, would you have met the boy's gaze? Or would your eyes have turned away, afraid of finding in them a reflection of what you lost long ago, the nearness of God? He stayed until the sun fully rose, casting gold on Samuel's face. The light made the boy seem both ancient and new, like a prophecy breathing. The pastor did not speak again. He only removed his hat, bowed his head, and whispered, Walk with him, child. And in that moment, for the first time in years, the pastor felt he was not praying to heaven. He was standing inside it. At first, the town only whispered. Stories always travel faster than truth, especially when they carry the scent of heaven. Some said the Miller boy saw angels in the fields. Others claimed he healed a bird that had fallen from a tree just by holding it. The parents denied miracles. They spoke of nothing but their son's peace. Yet peace itself can be a miracle when the world has forgotten it. One Sunday, the pastor finally told the congregation what he had seen. His words were measured, humble. There's a boy among us who reminds me that God still walks. He didn't name Samuel, but everyone knew. Silence followed, heavy and bright. After that, people began to visit the farmhouse, not with curiosity now, but with need. They came with questions too heavy for language. A mother who had lost her child, a man whose faith had dried up to dust, a widow who no longer prayed because her prayers had turned to echoes. And every one of them left changed, not by answers, but by something quieter. Samuel never preached. He would listen, his small hands folded, his gaze resting somewhere past the visitor's shoulder. Sometimes he said only a single sentence, You're already forgiven, or He hasn't gone anywhere. Once, an old farmer arrived, his eyes red with grief. He sat across from the boy, hat twisting in his hands. My wife passed last month, he said. I can't feel God anymore. Samuel looked at him a long time, then whispered, He feels you. The man broke. He wept without shame, his sobs filling the room like rainfall after drought. When he left, his steps were lighter, as if something had been lifted from the ground beneath him. Word spread of these encounters, of peace found without ceremony, of prayers answered without words. The church grew fuller, not with seekers of spectacle, but with souls remembering reverence. People said the fields themselves felt softer, the air gentler since the boy began to speak. The pastor would visit often now, sitting outside with Samuel in the late afternoons. Do you know what you're doing to these people? He asked once. Samuel shook his head. I'm not doing anything. It's him. He just likes when hearts open. One evening, a group from the nearby village came, bringing bread and candles. They asked if Samuel would pray for them. The boy nodded, but instead of words, he simply held one candle and closed his eyes. For a moment, the wind stopped. The candles didn't flicker. The night itself seemed to hold its breath. No one could say what happened, only that when they opened their eyes, they felt lighter, steadier, as though a forgotten promise had been whispered back into their souls. From that night on, people began to visit, not to ask, but to listen. They came and sat in silence around the farmhouse, sometimes for hours. Children played quietly, parents bowed their heads, no one led, no one commanded. It was as if the boy had turned their hearts toward a presence they already carried, but had forgotten how to feel. And through all this, Samuel remained unchanged, humble, still, gentle. He never asked for attention. He never called himself anything holy. He simply continued to walk, his small feet tracing invisible paths of peace wherever he went. You've seen crowds gather for noise, for spectacle, for miracles that flash and fade. But what if a child's silence gathered them instead? Would your heart recognize that something unseen had brushed the air? Would you feel it before you believed it? A woman once said, after leaving the miller's porch, I don't know what that boy is, but when he looked at me, I felt like God remembered my name. If you had been there, standing among them, candle in hand, the dusk turning gold around that small figure, what would you have felt? Perhaps not fear, perhaps not joy, but that trembling middle ground between both, where the soul begins to listen again. Because some mysteries don't come to be solved, they come to be remembered. It was the eve of the harvest, when the pastor called for a night of prayer. The fields were gold under the dusk, and the air smelled of wheat and wood smoke. People came from every direction, carrying lanterns, shawls, and questions they could no longer silence. The farmhouse yard filled with faces lit by trembling flames. Samuel sat quietly near the fig tree, the same place where he had once whispered to the wind. No one told him to speak. He didn't stand before the people or raise his hands. He only looked at them, his gaze steady, kind, as if he recognized every soul gathered there. The pastor began to pray, his voice deep but uncertain, like a man feeling the edge of something immense. Then a strange hush fell. Even the insects seemed to pause. The pastor's voice faltered, and all eyes turned to the boy. Samuel's face was bathed in lantern light. His lips parted slightly, and though he spoke softly, everyone heard him, as if the words bypassed the air and went straight into the heart. He's closer than the air, the boy said. You keep looking up, but he walks among you. A murmur rippled through the crowd, not fear, but awe. Samuel continued, his tone calm, almost tender. He never stopped walking. Enoch didn't disappear. He just went where God was already waiting. And he still waits, right here. The silence that followed was alive, breathing. Some wept without knowing why. Others closed their eyes, hands trembling as though touching something they could not name. The boy looked up toward the night sky. The stars were faint at first, veiled behind thin clouds, but as the crowd watched, the clouds drifted apart, revealing a field of light so clear it seemed to pulse. Samuel rose to his feet. He said, the world forgets, he whispered, but heaven remembers every faithful step. No wind blew, yet the lantern flames leaned toward him all at once. The people gasped. The pastor fell to his knees. In that moment it felt as though the earth itself bowed, not in fear, but in reverence. Then Samuel smiled. It was the same soft, knowing smile he'd worn since the first day he spoke the impossible. He's walking again, he said simply. Someone began to sing, a trembling hymn that rose like dawn. Others joined, voices breaking, hearts open. The melody spread across the field, and for a heartbeat, time lost its hold. The mother held her husband's hand tightly, both of them weeping. Not because they feared losing their son, but because they finally understood that nothing holy is ever lost. Samuel looked around, his small hands glowing faintly in the lamplight. You don't need to see him, he said. Just walk. Then he knelt, pressing his palm to the soil. He's here. And the earth, as if answering, gave a low hum. Not a sound, but a vibration that passed through every body, every breath. The people cried out, some laughing, some silent, but all trembling with the same truth. The divine was no longer a story from long ago. It was walking again, in them, through them, around them. If you were there, standing among that sea of faces bathed in light and tears, would you have spoken? Or would you have fallen to your knees, afraid to breathe, afraid to break the silence that had become holy? Because in that silence, deep, alive, eternal, the mystery did not ask to be understood. It asked only to be felt. And as the lanterns dimmed and the stars grew brighter, Samuel whispered one last time. He said, love never leaves footprints. The words settled into the night like seeds, and for a long time afterward, no one moved. No one could. Because when heaven stands that close, even the soul forgets how to walk away. Morning rose gently over the valley, washing the fields in pale gold. The night of the vigil had ended, but its echo lingered in every heart. The farmhouse looked the same door, the same worn steps. Yet something invisible had changed. The ground itself seemed to breathe softer, as though still remembering the weight of sacred feet. Samuel was back at the kitchen table, legs swinging lightly, eating bread with honey. He hummed a faint tune, the one that had become a secret among the people. His parents moved around him quietly. They spoke little now, not because there was fear between them, but because words had become too small. The pastor visited again, though he said almost nothing. He simply sat with them, listening to the rhythm of the home, the creak of the chair, the sound of the kettle, the quiet hum of the child. When he finally rose to leave, he turned to Samuel and asked softly, "Do you still see him?" The boy looked up, eyes calm as dawn. "He doesn't need to be seen anymore," he said. "He's everywhere now." The pastor nodded, his own eyes bright. "Then he's truly walking with us." Samuel smiled. He never stopped. Days turned to weeks, and the village found a new stillness. People greeted one another differently, slower, with gentler words. The arguments that once filled the market faded. Even the fields seemed kinder. Crops grew fuller, the rains more merciful. When asked why, the old farmers only said, "The boy prayed with his silence." Children played near the fig tree where Samuel often sat, and though he joined them at times, he was quieter now, more inward. Sometimes he'd stop mid-laughter, looking at the sky as if hearing something distant. Once, his mother asked what he listened to. He smiled and said, "The footsteps between worlds." The pastor began writing about those days, filling his journal with lines that were half prayer, half confession. "I saw God in the face of a child," he wrote, "and I understood that faith is not a ladder to heaven, but a door already open." The farmhouse became a place of pilgrimage, though Samuel's parents never called it that. People came to sit beneath the fig tree, to breathe the air that had once trembled with the voice of the unseen. They left quieter, softer, carrying peace as if it were a fragile flame. Samuel never sought the attention. He continued helping with small chores, feeding animals, running barefoot through the wet grass. Yet wherever he went, the air seemed to listen. One afternoon, his mother found him gazing at the hills again. "What do you see, my son?" he answered with a whisper that trembled like sunlight through leaves. The same light that took him. "Do you mean Enoch?" "Yes," he said. "And the one who walked with him?" The mother's eyes filled with tears, but they were no longer tears of fear. "Will you go with him too?" she asked. Samuel smiled, reaching for her hand. "Not yet. There's still love to leave behind." The father, listening from the doorway, bowed his head. That single sentence healed years of silent questions. The evening light poured over the valley, soft as a psalm. Samuel's voice drifted through it, low and tender. He said, "Every faithful step leaves a light behind. So even if you forget the path, love will guide you back." And with that, the mystery that had once unsettled them became peace itself. Not an ending, but a rhythm. The divine had not departed. It had simply learned to dwell quietly within their days. The world went on. Harvests, births, quiet deaths. Yet no one who had stood in that yard ever forgot the feeling of that night. They carried it into their prayers, their laughter, their silence. If you had walked through that valley years later, you might have seen a small boy's footprints turned faint in the earth, leading toward the fig tree. And if you stood there long enough, you might have felt it, that same hush, that same tender nearness, as though heaven was once again brushing against the edge of the world. Because peace is not the absence of mystery. It is what remains when mystery becomes love. And love, eternal and unhurried, never truly leaves.